This is Community Forum, a public affairs presentation of McKenzie River Broadcasting. Each week, we learn about issues affecting our community with your host, Tracy Berry.
The start of March Madness with the excitement over the college basketball tournaments is accompanied by office pools and lots of professional sports betting. But for some Lane County residents, gambling is more than an occasional activity. It's an addiction that can drain their checking and savings accounts, affect relationships, and lead to feelings of depression, anxiety, guilt, and shame. This morning on Community Forum, we sit down with Julie Hynes from Lane County Health and Human Services. She's a specialist in problem gambling addictions and treatment. She's here to talk about the latest trends and also chat about some of the growing challenges. Julie, thanks so much for joining us. Every year people talk about, the NCAA basketball tournaments, the office pools aren't those fun. There's also all this major gambling that goes on in conjunction with it. That's just sort of the tip of the iceberg of what you see locally. Talk a bit about that.
Yeah, it really is the tip of the iceberg. I mean, we talk about people filling out their NCAA brackets. Now we even have the women's brackets, which we didn't even have a few years ago. But it really is the tip of the iceberg. When we look at things like fantasy sports that people are playing, where they, wager on individual performers and make their own sort of fantasy team, that's a very popular thing as well. And there's growing different types of gaming that we don't think about as being potentially gambling that involve video games as well.
And I was thinking about the fact that, when we first started chatting years ago, a lot of it was games that you'd see people, who'd play Texas Hold'em, even in 5th and 6th grade, or, card rooms, or just, the lotteries and things like that. But so much of it has gone online and has gone virtual. That makes it a little tougher to be aware of it and track it, I would guess.
It really does. It's an issue that's really easy to hide, and I think many behaviors are not so easy to hide. For example, if you see someone drinking, you can pretty much establish physically when they've been drinking and smell it. And with gambling, you could be sitting in a classroom and be gambling, and no one would really know because you could be on your phone. It's also very common for women to be going to little delis and places around town which offer video poker. So the electronic forms of gambling, even in that capacity in our neighborhoods. In Lane County alone, we have over 200 video lottery retailers. And some people have argued that they're considered mini casinos because of the nature of them being, video lottery games in one establishment. Most of these retailers also offer alcohol. Many of them sell tobacco. Obviously, you can't smoke in the places, but as we can see, many of these behaviors kind of are all connected, and they're very easy to access. And I think the accessibility is what people sometimes get concerned about in terms of increasing the risk.
Well, and as you've said in the past, too, just driving through town, you get a lot of visual triggers from it if you're prone to problem gambling.
Yeah, for people in recovery, it's a big challenge because of the accessibility. When we think about just even people who are at home and having the opportunity and the mechanisms to be able to even gamble at home, even if they're in recovery, just something like seeing a pop-up window could be triggering for folks who are in recovery. Driving down the street, as you said, just seeing the lottery logo or seeing something that points out that they have video lottery can also be a trigger for folks. And so there's many different challenges for people, especially who are in recovery.
So we know that there are some people who have these issues. How do you know approximately what percentage of the local population or how many people are affected by them?
Well, we don't have a lot of funding for being able to look at, say, local, like Lane County, and drill down on this level. But we do have information regarding Oregon as a whole. And the most recent survey, which was published in 2016, showed that about 2.6%, or 1 in every 38 adults, roughly, have a gambling problem in Oregon. And these are folks who are, responding to surveys and self-identifying as having gambling problems. So there could even be a larger number for people that aren't self-identifying, but those are the figures that we're seeing here in Oregon.
Well, and even though that may be 1 in 38 having the issue, and even though a lot of times they might be gambling online or in some small place, the effect of that can be far larger.
Absolutely. Much like with any other addictive behavior, that it's not just the individual that's obviously affected. It's their family members. It's their colleagues. It's their school, their relationship issues that get affected. And it's very painful. And oftentimes people lose trust in the individual with the problem, because we hear over and over and over again from spouses, from partners that say, I thought they were having an affair. The way that their behavior was, it was so sneaky. They would lie to me. The money would be missing. There would be, different credit cards, many different indications that would often clue somebody in that individual is having an affair. Whereas in reality, they're actually, having a severe gambling problem, and they're hiding that behavior, and they're hiding the finances. And so the trust really gets broken in many relationships.
I worked with a guy who his mother had problem gambling issues, and he said he and his family always knew when mom was back having problems because the phone would be shut off or something like that.
Yeah, and the debt is usually the first indicator for people, is when they notice that bills aren't being paid. That's usually when people start finding out that there's a problem. And, of course, the sneaky behavior and things like that where people are suspicious. But it usually comes down to the finances as the first real clue that that person is in trouble with gambling.
You mentioned earlier in the interview that people now can gamble on their phones, and so someone could be gambling in class and no one would know it. We have seen that students, and including some younger ones, but also at the college level, are doing a lot of addictive behaviors related to gambling. Can you talk about that?
Youth are really involved, obviously, in electronics. They're digital natives. They're used to picking up a device when they're toddlers. And the issue for people in prevention is that we're seeing young people starting to spend money within games. They may even download the games for free, but they may start spending money in games, real money, to get virtual rewards. And that's, by the true definition of gambling, that is gambling, because they're risking money or something of value on trying to get something of greater value. And to those maybe who think, oh, that's just a bunch of baloney, in reality it is shown, research is actually showing that the youth who spend money within games are more likely to then go on to gamble, and then later on go on to develop gambling problems. I'm not trying to be an alarmist, and I'm not trying to say that youth shouldn't spend any money on games, but it is something that parents ought to be aware of, because it is what's considered, what we consider in the prevention profession is to be what's called grooming. It's getting them prepared, it's getting them to start to spend money, it's getting them involved in the game, and then later on, particularly if it's a gambling type of a game, a casino-like game, they may say, oh, you're doing really, really well at this. Why don't you start spending some real money on it and really win real money? And so free games then turn into games where they end up spending money.
So if you're a parent or a caregiver and you suspect that a child or a teen is having some of these issues, how do you have that conversation? What do you do about that?
Well, one of the tips that we recommend and really try to go with parents early on is having the conversation with their kids about their devices early on. Talking with them about, I'm going to monitor your device. It's not that I don't trust you. It's about that I'm making sure that you're safe. And that really is, because there's so many other things that we're worried about right now with sexting and cyberbullying and predatory behavior. And this is potentially one of those things that we should be concerned about as well. So having the conversation with kids early about devices, if they choose to have their child have the devices, and then making sure that they continue to monitor and be aware of any kind of behavior that may look like it might be starting to cause problems. If you're a parent that maybe already has an older teenager and you're concerned, those are still conversations that you can have. Obviously, if the rules haven't been established earlier on, it's much more difficult to have that conversation. Mom, Dad, how can you do this? You've never done this before. But we still recommend that parents do monitor, as long as they have a minor in the home, that they make sure that they monitor those devices.
And once a teen or a young adult has moved out on their own, either for work or for college, suddenly they're in a much more unsupervised environment. So what are the options there for family, friends, and the like?
It's really challenging. I was in a presentation earlier this week in Mapleton and was talking with a parent about their adult child that may have a problem. And it's really hard because legally there's not much you can do. And obviously you could treat that situation much like you would treat anyone else that you love and care about, and saying, I really care about you. I'm concerned that this may be an issue. can I offer you some resources and maybe just try to listen. Usually, though, you'll get a lot of pushback. I've never had a conversation yet where I said I'm concerned about you and I'm concerned there's a problem, where the individual has come back and said, well, gosh, you're right. I do have a problem.
That's not the way that conversation works.
Yeah, so it takes time, sometimes years. But to continue to check in and continue to have that conversation. There's been a lot of conversation as well lately about depression and suicidal behavior. And one of the issues that, particularly in problem gambling, there's a very high rate of suicidal ideation and also attempts and completion. And that's a big concern. And when we talk with people who have any kind of problem, if they have any kind of mental health issue or depression, anxiety, we want to make sure that we check in and we want to make sure that we care, we show that concern and that we're listening. And related to that, if the individual, whether they have a gambling problem or not, if they are feeling like they are depressed, is to ask them, are you feeling suicidal? Just to directly ask that question in some fashion, even as uncomfortable as it is, and then to offer some resources for that person, and tell them we want them to live and we care about them. Particularly with gambling problems, people can sometimes get into so much debt and so many relationship problems that they don't see a way out. There's always a way out, and there's always hope. And thankfully in Oregon, we have free treatment for folks who have gambling problems and for their families.
Yeah, so talk about that. There are a lot of different options in that range of treatment. What's available, really?
In Oregon, there is free help, whether it's usually what happens is that someone can call inpatient for severe issues, which is 1-877-MY-LIMIT. They call the helpline. They always get answered by a certified gambling counselor. So the person who picks up the phone is always a certified gambling counselor, and they can connect and they can get placed into a local option for them. If they're not here in Lane County, they could be somewhere like Pendleton and get help in Pendleton. There's treatment centers all over our state. If transportation or if being able to get there is an issue, and there's been also some high-profile folks that really don't feel safe in going to a treatment center, there's also options for online help as well. They do Skype counseling. So it's really phenomenal in terms of the amount of support that there is here in Oregon. We have help here in Oregon, and it is free. And it's also not just for the gambler. It's also for anyone who is a loved one. And so if you have like a brother or an aunt or your spouse who has the problem, there are support groups that help navigate through that as well. All the distrust, the finances, just navigating through that relationship and being able to figure out how to move on.
Yeah, because for a lot of people, the first step in helping someone else is taking care of yourself.
Absolutely. And a lot of times what happens with, as we know, with many addictions is that everyone starts looking at the person who has the problem. And everyone forgets about the person who is left holding the bags, if you will. And the spouse, the family members, the loved ones, they're the ones who need support as well. And it's important to not forget them.
So you mentioned the phone number, the 1-877-MY-LIMIT, 1-877-MY-LIMIT, web resources as well, since everyone's got a device.
Everyone's got a device, and a lot of people hate the phone. I'm one of them. One of the things to do is also to log on to www.opgr.org. That's opgr.org. It's short for Oregon Problem Gambling Resource. That's an online where you can chat. You can find different other methods of getting some resources. What do I do if I think someone has a problem? Taking a test. What if I have a problem? There's a lot of different resources on that site, and they also show where the treatment facilities are too. And
preventionlane.org, which is our Lane County health site. You have some resources there as well that also point to these state resources.
Yeah, we sure do. And we've also got resources for parents and educators. And I think it's really important as a parent and as an educator that other parents and educators are aware of the issue among young people, because we just don't see it. We're so focused on so many other things right now, and we've got so much pressure in every different direction. And it's not adding one more thing to a plate, but it is to be aware that that youth are gambling. We don't see it, but that there are resources, and we talk about some of those resources on our website, preventionlane.org.
Anything we're missing you wanted to talk about?
We just want to encourage everyone to have the conversation during Problem Gambling Awareness Month. This is the month in which we typically really share about folks and wanting to increase awareness, but to absolutely know that the resources are there and to continue having the conversation throughout the year.
And the phone number again is 1-877-MY-LIMIT, or you can go to www.opgr.org or preventionlane.org. Julie Hynes, thanks for being our guest this morning on Community Forum.
Community Forum is a public affairs presentation of McKenzie River Broadcasting.